Treg.
Howdy, Liz. How are you?
Doing good. How you doing?
Doing well.
Chris is going to get us some elevator music next time, he said. Some waiting room music.
I was hoping Luke could sing, maybe.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
You can?
Yep.
Oh, great. I've been having issues.
Uh-oh.
Maybe Luke could just maybe sing a little Journey for us.
I could do that for you. It wouldn't be good, but I could do it.
I think it ought to be Sting. Don't stand too close to me.
You made it. You
Yeah,
said
I
you
did.
weren't gonna-
I did. Boy, we cranked that through that meeting and I hustled right out of there. I couldn't listen to the story of how they smuggled a propeller that was repaired in South Africa back to Lesotho, but I guess it was very interesting. So when the borders are closed, how do you get something across?
That's crazy. I see that we leave the mayor in as a participant over on the other side tonight. See what happens.
He entered the room and then 5 other people immediately entered with him. So it took me a moment to click through everyone.
Okay, we'll let him hang out.
Yeah, I'll go back. I've got some things I'd like to say. So
Mr. Mayor, I'm watching for Councilman Borton, but you do have a quorum.
yeah, we'll give him another minute.
Hey, Jessica. Hey, Robert.
Hello.
How's it going? How are the mountains?
I just always happen to be at this one spot in front of
I
Redfish
know.
Lake. So strange.
You get a great signal, though, so I wouldn't move.
Weather conditions are exactly the same every time. It's really something. No, I wish I was there.
Okay, by my clock, I got 2 minutes after. So if people are ready, we can go ahead and get going. Chris, Adrian, are we recording and ready to go? And I see Mr. Borton has entered the room, so that's perfect timing. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order. For the record, it is Tuesday, June 2nd at 4:32 p.m. We'll begin this meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Borton,
Here.
Councilman Cavanagh,
Here.
Councilwoman Perot,
Here.
Councilwoman Strader,
Here.
Councilman Hoagland,
Here.
Councilman Burnt,
Here.
Mayor Simison.
Here. Item number 2 is adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt,
I move that we adopt the agenda as published.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as published. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Item number 3, consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt,
I move that we approve the consent agenda for the mayor to sign and for the clerk to attest.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
I second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Perot.
I do have a question about one of the agenda items. Is this an appropriate time to ask? I assume so.
Are you looking to, Mr. Neri, is there normally discussion on the consent?
Only if you want to remove it or you just had a question. It's okay.
Okay.
I
Councilwoman
do
Perot.
just have a question.
Yes.
It's regarding item 3G, the Ada County Highway District bid. I'm wondering if maybe our council liaison could give us some information as to why the STARS program did not fund that, or what changed, I guess, from ACHD's original plan to fund the streetlights.
I'm sorry, you're talking about item 5A or?
Oh, hold on a second. Let me pull it back up again. Make sure I'm in this.
3G.
3G.
Okay.
That's correct.
So, Mr. Mayor, I would recommend then removing that from the consent agenda to item 4 for discussion.
Okay. Would the maker of the motion like to amend their motion?
Yes, sir. We'd love to. I move that we approve the consent agenda minus moving 3G to item 4A. That looks like we took care of it.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Second agree?
I second agrees.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda by moving item 3G to item 4A. Is there further discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. So with that, we'll move to item 4A regarding approval of Ada County Highway District bid results for Ada County Highway District to 10 road utility improvements. Warren, is this something that you are able to speak to?
Yeah, it's related directly to the budget amendment, which is the first item on the regular agenda. So I'll probably just, if you're okay, I'll, it is just a second. I'm getting some more clarification on what that one was for the.
This looked like a utility thing for an ACHD project, 10-mile U-stick to McMillan. So it's completely separate from STARS.
Okay, so just Al's here with me. He's trying to give me some update. I wasn't familiar with the one that was on the consent agenda. I thought it was related to the streetlights, but he's saying it's not related to streetlights. So maybe, Al, do you have something you can share with him real quick?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
let me say I apologize if I got those two confused. I might have made it, written it down wrong in my notes.
Well, we pulled it off, so we'll at least let you know what this one is about.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not up to speed 100%, but the item that was 3G appears to be in regards to an ACHD project on 10 Mile Road from U-stick to McMillan. And so these are kind of standard utility adjustments that are required on an ACHD project. So it'll be water and sewer raising and lowering.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burr.
excuse me. In regard to the STARS project, that was done on Chinden Boulevard between, if I'm remembering, Linder and out to Highway 16. I think that's
Yeah, we can speak to all that in 5A
okay.
Specifically. Yeah, I don't believe this has anything to do with streetlights, was to my knowledge.
Mr. Mayor,
That's one for Strader.
no problem. We'll definitely talk about the streetlight installation in 5A and the reasoning for that. But before we get to that, just wanted to point out from working with the Public Works Department, from what I understand, anytime ACHD is doing any kind of roadway improvements, we need to do utility improvements at the same time, because otherwise it's not efficient for us from a cost perspective. And so we basically get forced to align those projects together. And my guess is that is the reasoning for that. Thank you.
Are there any other questions on item 4A? Okay, if not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I would move approval of item 4A, approval of Ada County Highway District bid results for the Ada County Highway District 10-mile utility improvements, Ustick to McMillan project for the not to exceed amount of $518,303.75.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve item 4A. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. So item 5A is Public Works, a budget amount of $196,185 for streetlight installation for the Chinden Winco project. I'll turn this over to Warren for comments.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and council members. So the Public Works Department is requesting $196,185 budget amendment to fund the installation of streetlights in conjunction with the Chinden Boulevard roadway improvements being done as part of the Winco project. This amendment is similar to the one council approved a few months ago for the Costco project and will provide continuous lighting along a busy segment of roadway and greatly enhance vehicular and pedestrian safety in this corridor. We originally believed that the funding for this lighting project would come from the STARS agreement between the state and Winco, but as the Costco design was finalized and the project was sent out to bid, ITD informed us that street lighting would not be an eligible reimbursement expense under the STARS agreement, and that the city of Meridian would have to fund the street lights if they wanted them to go in. The Winco project has been bid and the cost for the streetlights have been identified, and this amendment will allow the city to enter into an agreement with Winco to install the lights as part of the overall project. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Warren. And I know that there were several meetings held with the District 3 engineer on this topic to try to get a better understanding of why street lighting has been allowed in other STARS projects and not would be allowed in the Costco or this one. And then at the end of the day, the answer was because, and they would not allow it. Sorry, Mr. Harry didn't make. That's
Well
about
said.
that's about as much as they would actually say.
I would agree.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Strader.
just a few comments. So, I mean, this is a very important area to do streetlight improvements, especially now. Like, we can't go back and do it later. And we want to have that continuous lighting, especially for safety reasons. So it's very similar to the Costco decision. I did want to say, you know, maybe a preview for budget discussions. I think we've got something like 4,000 lights that at some point make sense to convert over to LED. And so, you know, I'd love for us to have kind of a wider budget discussion in the future about, you know, the budget that makes sense to convert those over. Right now, I think for simplicity, part of the funding for this is coming from the, you know, future financial plan, but I think during budgeting will be a great time to have a discussion about how much council wants to put toward these conversions. Most of them, you know, are a payback period of like 5 years. It's a technology we understand. And at the current rate that we're converting them with the 75,000 now, that would take us like 21 years. It's a big ROI. So I'm comfortable making a motion to approve this, but I do think it would be great during the budget discussion for council to talk about, how many LED conversions we want to do. So,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
I'm in agreement with the budget amendment. I was surprised to read that I would assume the STARS program works by a set of standards that we've worked, we've worked with the STARS program in the past. We, like you mentioned, there was one that has been a part of the Costco project. And I'm curious how, we're this late, I guess, in the game and just finding out that the state wasn't gonna fund that as part of the STARS program. And I just was curious if there is any information that could be shared about how we got here.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Just a comment. So the same issue actually happened to us on Costco.
Okay.
So this isn't that we just found this out. Unfortunately, we found out before the Costco streetlights, and that also had to have a budget amendment, is my understanding. I don't know a ton about the direct discussions on it, but from what I understand, I think Warren had mentioned that a lot of great reasoning wasn't given to us, but unfortunately, it looks like that's the decision that they've made pretty consistently going forward.
And what you want to talk specifically about what you may have heard, other than they don't view street lighting as an expense that's approved by the legislature.
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we had a good conversation with them. They had previously in the village project allowed street lighting in the STARS agreement. We pressed them to see if they had an answer as to why they allowed it in that project and they weren't going to allow it in this project. And honestly, the answer we got is we're not sure why they allowed it in the village project, but based on their assessment of ITD policy currently, they didn't believe that street lighting was an allowable reimbursable expense, and they weren't going to include it in the STARS agreement for the Costco or the Winco projects. Even though for the several months in the design process that we had with them, the communication was always that they would be allowed. When the Costco project finally got to essentially final design and went to the powers that be at ITD, they changed everybody's mind and said, we won't allow it. And we had conversations at that time with the district engineer, and Robert pretty much summed up the conversation we had at that time. We've had follow-up conversations with the new district engineer about this Winco project to see if there was an opportunity to maybe change course. And although the dialogue was, I would say, was much more cordial and productive, at the end of the day, they still came back and said no. So that's kind of where we're at.
Mr. Mayor, a follow-up question, if I may.
That's one pro.
So whether it's part of the STARS program or not, I assume the state has standards for their highway development that streetlights are typically required. And so is that not the case?
Actually, you'd be surprised. And this is something that they actually admitted to us. ITD doesn't deal with urban highways very much. If you can think about all the roadways that they have to administer throughout the state, most of their roadways are very rural in nature. And so urban highways, and especially urban lighting, is not really covered. There's not a whole lot of information in their policy about that. Their policy at present is that they light intersections, and that's it. They don't light anything else. And we pressed them that, this is not your rural country road. This is going through the middle of our town. And they admitted that they may have to look at that in the future, but right now they're not really prepared to address that.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Carey.
Yeah, I could add to what Warren said. I was in the same meetings, and they use all their crash statistics that they use to make these decisions are based on rural highways. And the crash statistics on Chinden don't bear out the need for this lighting, but the crash statistics are all related to a 55 two-lane highway. And this is a 5-lane roadway that's going to be completely different, but they have no statistics to support that. And the only urban highway they have locally is Eagle Road. And nowadays, crash statistics on Eagle Road are significantly lower, but not because of just the lighting, but because of the islands down the center of it. So they just don't have the data to support it. And like Warren said, they agreed that that's probably an outdated model, but they don't have any other way to do it right now. So the only give that they were willing to do on the Costco project was, I believe the conduit was allowed to be included because they told us this issue very, very late in the project. And so the district engineer conceded that the conduit could be part of it, but the additional lighting had to be on the city. And they made it clear in that conversation more than once, that would not be the same for Winco. They were telling us at that point, Winco's design was outside of that. So they would have to include, the city would have to do it if they wanted more than the intersection lighting.
And I think the larger issue, I don't think that they want to get into the issue of lighting streets as a general practice. And if they allowed it in the STAR agreement, it helps them others set a rationale for why they should be part of roadway project requirements or otherwise. Plus you have people on the other side of the street in another community that didn't want lights on this section as well. So I think there's a whole host of reasons.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavanagh.
question for Mr. Neri. Bill, what level of involvement or sign off or support do local jurisdictions have with STARS agreements for future agreements?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilman Kavanagh, not a great deal because again, it is a contract between the property owner and the state.
Okay.
And it's all based on the sales tax reimbursement. So we get input on standards, requirements. We were fortunate on the Costco side that we had collected some fees for lighting along there by the other projects. So we dedicated some of that to that project. I don't know if we have the same on this one, but Warren would know that. But yeah, we don't have a whole lot of input other than the standards that we have.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
That's one pro.
so will the lighting only be on the south side of the highway, or is Eagle going to be required to do the same for the north side of the highway just east of Linder?
So that's a very good question. The lighting will only be on the south side of the highway, but for a 5-lane roadway, or is it 5-lane roadway that they're proposing or building now, that'll be okay because we have mast arms on those lights that project those lights out far enough that we can get good coverage for 5 lanes. Sometime in the future, when they go to 7 lanes, we'll have to address what happens on the north side of the road. But for now, lighting on the south side, which is ours, is all that we're proposing. Even on the section where the city of Meridian has both sides of the roadway, we're only proposing it on the one side because that's adequate. With the mast arms on the lights, that's adequate to light the whole road.
And I think that like anything, ITD makes decisions based upon the current leadership of a community, not the future leadership or the long-term needs of what a community may want. So I think that those are future discussions for another date and time with City of Eagle leadership.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Schrader.
I move that we approve item 5A, a budget amendment in the amount of $196,185 for streetlight installation for the Chinden Winco project.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the budget amendment. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Borton,
Aye.
Kavanagh,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Strader,
Aye.
Hoagland,
Aye.
Ernst,
Aye.
All ayes, and the amendment is agreed to. Item 5B is from the Mayor's Office, the 2020 Citizen Survey, and I'll turn this over to Dave Miles.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and council members. Appreciate a little bit of your time this afternoon. This is a department report for our 2020 City of Meridian Citizen Survey. So for those that may not know, we've run this survey for several cycles, the last being in 2017 and the first being in 2014. spread them out over 3 years, and we're at our time where we'll run this survey again with the goal of understanding really the community's perspective on the quality of services that are offered in Meridian, both from Meridian directly, so our water and sewer and other services that we offer, as well as those services provided by our service provider partners, whether it's ACHD or the school district or other agencies as well. As I provided in our memo, we do try to track these questions consistently with prior years, and of the 35 questions, 32 of them are the same, if not identical, from 2017. With the new questions we did add related to transportation and related to, we asked a COVID service question as well. Wanted to get your feedback and take on the survey itself. If there's any additional points that you have in mind that you as a body think are important in asking, we do plan on rolling this survey out over the summer with reports and results coming back at the end of the summer or early fall. So maybe I'll stop there and have a discussion with you all about any questions you might have.
Thank you, Dave. Council, this survey has been used in the past to ask residents other types of questions, and I think that's really one of the main issues. We want to get your feedback, and if you don't have any immediate comments right now, we can always take that at a later point in time, but Mr. Miles would be happy to take any thoughts you may have as we consider the next steps.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Pro.
I just would like to make a recommendation to question number 3. There was a question about quality of housing in Meridian, and I'd like to suggest that we also add an option in that section about affordability of housing.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Perot, thank you for the suggestion. We can certainly add an option in as a line item, whether that be a line item underneath, or make a 10th option asking around affordability if that's wanted.
And I guess the question for council is, sorry, I got to try to move my thing around so I can look and see what's going on. Would you prefer a 1 to 10 or a separate question if we were to include something on housing affordability in a different light?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavanagh.
I think my suggestion would probably be to ask that question separately. And the only reason that I tend to lean that way is I think in the past few months that we've all been on council together, we've had applicants come before us that talk about the affordability of their product that they're planning to sell in the open market, ranging anywhere from, I think, $200 all the way up to $500,000 and claiming that it's affordable housing. So I worry about just that, the term affordable housing being a little confused by the public. So maybe a separate question with maybe a stronger set of sideboards might help to get us a clearer picture as to the public's opinion on that subject.
So Councilman Kavanagh or anybody else, would this be, would we want to ask them whether they consider housing in Meridian as affordable, or give them a range of prices to what they think housing affordability should be? We can also work with the company, because I'm sure that other communities have asked affordability housing questions, and see what they would recommend.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavanagh.
I would be really supportive of asking those that run the survey as to what they suggest in terms of the question that yields the best or most clear response.
Okay. We can definitely reach out to them on that element and see what type of recommendations they have.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Quick one. I spoke with Dave Miles earlier, and I was comfortable that a lot of other things on my mind are being asked in different surveys. One thing I forgot to ask, did we get a lot of feedback on our open space survey? Hoping that we did, so we don't have to recover that ground again. But if we didn't somehow, this might be our last shot to get feedback on that.
I believe we've gotten close to 600 responses as of my last element. You know, like anything with the open space survey, it's not a scientifically valid survey, but you know, if you ask that one and then you ask this one, which one do you want to give more credence to? I guess that would be the question, but food for thought. But there have been about 600 responses the last time I heard.
Mr. Mayor, to that point, we just had an update today, this afternoon, actually from Community Development. They've reported over 1,300 completed responses to this point. So,
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavanagh.
a question about that for clarification, either from you or from Dave. If I'm correct, the open space survey is being conducted by Community Development. It's not a scientifically validated survey, but this one here, the overall city survey is. Is that correct?
That is correct. We strive to get a cross section from different parts of the community, different age groups, you know, to make sure it's in theory representative of the full committee, not one sector of the community that's being asked the question.
Mr. Mayor, for follow-up.
Councilman Kavanagh.
To that point, then, I guess I'd encourage council, if there are a couple of questions that we think are really critical in the open space survey that we may want to look to also have added into this, I'm certainly supportive of that. I know you try and find that right balance of not asking too many questions, but ask the right questions. But I think Councilmember Strader brings up a valid point about that data being helpful. But I think that if there are a couple of questions that we think that are in there that are really mission critical, that maybe we look to incorporate that in the survey as well.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Miles.
Councilman Kavanagh, we certainly have space. The way the survey is administered, when it's issued by the consultant, it's one of the versions is in writing, so we're limited to page space, but we do have page space available. It all depends on how long a question is as to how many questions we can actually add. So that's my only caution, but we have space to add a couple of questions for sure.
And my recommendation that I gave to Dave, and I would give the same for the open space, because if I recall, the open space is a sequence of questions to get the information. It's not one question, it's not two questions, but many. But looking at the results of that data, if there are some issues which have not been resolved, or it creates the need for an additional aspect, you know, to me, that's probably the approach. And that was the same direction I gave Mr. Miles regarding results from the survey that was done by Public Works, is if there's unresolved issues, to look at asking them, because to the point, we can't ask the entire survey from that standpoint.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
I appreciate Councilman Kavner's suggestion, and as I'm sitting here thinking about what he suggested regarding housing affordability, I wonder if it wouldn't be a good idea if a new section is going to be created, that we just have a cost of living section. It's not just about affordable housing, but just, you know, how do you feel the cost of living is in Meridian overall? Because I know there are people moving out of the city because the cost of living has gotten too high for them. And most of it is related to housing, but some of it's not. You know, vehicle insurance rates are related to location, and there are different cost of living concerns that the public is having. And so we currently have the highest rents of any other city in the Valley. So curious what my fellow council members would think about that. If we're not going to add another section for affordable housing, then I wouldn't worry about it. But if we're going to go ahead and do that, we might as well have some cost of living questions.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Strader.
I liked the recommendation of finding out what other survey questions have been asked on that topic for other cities. Like, I think that makes sense, and that might give us something to start with. I agree with you that it's an issue, and I think it would be appropriate to have a section of our survey to take a look at that. For the open space, I would defer to the open space, I guess, committee or folks who are working on that to look at the data they have so far and just let us know if if a follow-up question or two is needed, certainly not to re-administer the whole survey, but it's a pretty critical issue too. So if there's one or two that we need to follow up, that makes sense to me.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I guess one other ask, if there is space, I believe in 2017, we asked our citizens their feedback on a clean indoor air ordinance. To me, it would make sense, because there hasn't been any action necessarily taken about that, to, if the space allows, to ask our public their opinion on that again.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh, we can certainly look at that in the spacing.
And, and I will speak to that one. I did have Dave remove that question from this survey. While we got the information, to your point, no action was taken, but we have seen several businesses opt to go smoke-free of their own accord. And the question I would encourage all of council on any of these issues that we ask is, to Councilman Cavanagh's point, you asked a question about housing affordability. What actions may you want to take related to housing affordability or clean air or open space? It's one thing to get the information. It's another thing that you want to do with that information when you get it. So food for thought as you consider what this looks like and the questions that we receive.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
you'll like mine because it doesn't take extra space. It's already an existing question, and looking at some of the subjects that it entails. On number 16, it asks to please rate the city's effort in the enforcement of the following codes and ordinances. And that's done two ways. One is through our code enforcement group, and others, it's our police department patrol division. I asked Rich of our code enforcement, what are our top 6 issues that they deal with? And it was parking violations, nuisance weeds, signs, abandoned vehicles, UDC or land use violations, and then just general nuisance, junk, trash, sidewalk obstructions, that sort of thing. He did let me know, because I told him, this is result, with the survey, trying to match things up, make sure we're asking the right things. He said dilapidated houses, buildings are a very rare occurrence for us. He says illegal dumping and graffitiing are investigated by patrol officers. And the property owner's responsibility to abate the ensuing nuisance conditions is where code enforcement usually gets involved. He said, thankfully, neither is a common occurrence. And then what I was getting at when I was doing work from home for a couple months, and of course, school wasn't going on, working from your office, your home setting. And it was interesting to note, and I've had a few people ask me during the campaign about, what do you do about these noisy cars? And I noticed in our neighborhood, yeah, we've got some noisy cars. I can hear them go by, and I can have the TV on, and they're going down the street. I was thinking we could take out removal of graffiti or dilapidated houses or buildings and put in a question about motor vehicle noise or something like that. And just doing some reading on sound in general. It's very interesting what particularly the European countries are doing to mitigate sound and how that impacts humans and workspace, both indoor and outdoor. So I was thinking if there's something we could do with vehicle sounds or that sort of thing. And just, I think that's a little more relative to what people deal with rather than some of the things like dilapidated houses or buildings. We're not that community yet, or someday maybe where we'll be old, but right now they're downtown and we're taking care of that right now.
So here would be my suggestion. This list came from the police department of what they felt were the main issues. I will admit, I doubt that we sent them back to them and asked for an update of the issues they felt were good. I'd ask Mr. Neri if he's available to speak to I know the car exhaust system issue is very specific. And I think it's a state law in terms of, so again, it's limited in what we can do about it. Is perception the issue, or is enforcement the issue? Mr. Neri, are you aware, as I think this has come up even in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you are correct. There's a state code regarding that. Majority of cars are going to meet meet the state code requirement. They may seem noisy to the average person, which I get it, especially in a daytime setting where you're normally not even there. That they does seem very loud and distracting, but it's likely not going to be violating anything from a enforcement standpoint. It ends up very much like the discussion we had on air compression brakes and trying to enforce that. Again, I think a lot of it is perception. We occasionally get calls regarding cars that are leaky, older cars that may leak a little oil in the street. Again, we don't regulate that type of thing, so that's not really something code deals with. I think the illegally parking of vehicles on driveways is probably another area we have talked about with the council a number of times over the years, and that is certainly a complaint. But I don't know how much enforcement we would have beyond the state code in regards to noise from vehicles, because we don't really have the capability to enforce decibel readings and decibel meters in regards to the cars. So that would be the problem in asking a question that I don't know we could do much with the information.
Did I hear Mr. Hogan say he wants us to add something about the speedway noise from cars?
And Mr. Mayor, no. We know that's an issue and there's nothing we can do about it. So
I'm sorry, I couldn't make light.
Well, Mr. Mayor, it's just, yeah, it is a difficult one to enforce, but you know, when I'm sitting here and the car goes by and I can hear it on U-Stick, which is almost a quarter mile away, I can't imagine what those folks along U-Stick Road whose backyards are backed up to that are hearing. But it is difficult to enforce. It is a patrol action. They have to have an officer dispatched. It has to be caught. There has to be a complaint. I'm just curious as to noise, if that is even an issue. It might not be an issue. People don't notice it or anything. It just, I did have a couple people mention to me, but it was, you know, very neighborhood specific in another neighborhood to that. So just curious about that, but I would like to see if we could at least update this to go with more of the top issues that they're seeing to better match what the complaints are and get a sense of, okay, are we responding to those adequately? So that'd be something I think we definitely need to look into.
And I agree. We should get an updated list from the police department about their code specific items. I think, and you'll have to forgive my memory, but if there's a question about enforcement of moving violations in this list, I don't recall, but you know, speeding, running of red lights, loud vehicles, those are all moving violations that I think would be better grouped together if we need to go into perception of that. And Mr. Miles, do we have a question on traffic violations?
Mr. Mayor, no, there's not a moving violations question currently, but we can certainly look at it, work with code enforcement and PD and have them give us any updates to the list on question 16, as well as consider whether or not and what criteria we'd use for potentially a secondary question related to moving violations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Strader.
I would be interested to take a look at question 22, where people can rank the priority of different issues, and maybe Mr. Miles wants to comment on it. I know we did a public works survey that I think was pretty robust, and we had a lot of good feedback on clean energy and sustainability, and support for that. And we can talk about that in later meetings, but I was curious, does it make sense to identify how that priority is ranked here as well? Or do we feel like the survey results that we previously did give us a lot of direction on that? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I wasn't sure how many people actually completed that survey.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Strader, the survey that was done in 2019 for the Environmental and Solid Waste Survey was actually administered by the same firm. So it's under the statistical process. It was, I believe, I will get you the actual numbers, but it was a fair amount of replies back to get a statistical set of north of 500 respondents to ensure a 95% confidence interval. So in terms of how many people took it, that addresses that. Reached out to the Public Works Department in the development of these questions around whether or not an environmental question was left to the mayor's point, sort of unanswered or unactionable that we felt we needed to take. They felt like the survey at that time addressed and gave them enough support to move forward with the sustainable efforts that the city is making and seeking feedback and guidance from council. One of the questions had responded north of 80% or at 80% of the people felt environmental topics were important. So I think they felt comfortable at that point that that survey provided enough current information.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Thank you. Then I agree. It sounds like that was a statistically significant confidence interval, and that gives us enough direction going forward that I don't think we would need to add that to this survey.
Council, any further feedback or comments at this time? Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Miles. Oh, Mr. Borton.
Just a comment. I really appreciate this being done year over year or every 3 years. Some of the great value in it is not making a lot of changes to the data that we gather to see what fluctuates. And the list in 22 is one example of, I think, a good snapshot of changes in focus from our community on issues that are of interest and important to them. Based on that, we can drill down and discuss policy that might follow from it. So I appreciate the work that continues with this every 3 years.
Thank you. And the one thing that I would note, it is my intention to move this to an every other year survey, you know, to provide a little as our community grows. And I think it just provides a good snapshot. I think Boise does it every year. I don't think that we necessarily need that, but I think it's good for any new council to have a check-in on, you know, what they heard during the election cycle, and then follow that up with some actual information from the community on what they feel. So that will be the intention. So you'll see this again in 2022 under the mayor's budget at that time.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Pro.
what is the process from here on out? Are there a couple more, does Dave go back and talk to the company administering the survey, and there's a few more drafts done, and then we approve the final version? And what's the timeline?
Well, there won't be a council approved version from that standpoint. We will can take this feedback and make modifications, especially for any new questions that are added. We will share a final draft at that point in time. And then as far as administrative timeline, Dave, you want to give an update on where you believe we are?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Perot, to the mayor's point, we'll make the changes and additions that I've heard this afternoon. Talking with the consultant, we're trying to get this in their hands in the next 2 weeks, and that would allow us to have survey results back, a completed survey by early to mid-August, with a report back sometime hopefully before the end of August.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
I just don't think there's much more that we could extrapolate from this report. So well done.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the feedback, and we will keep you in the loop with the changes that we add to it.
Thank you, Dave. All right, item 5C, human resources, separation of policies and procedures. I'll turn this over to Crystal with the assist by Bill, I believe. Or
Yes,
Vice
Mr.
President.
Mayor, members of council, I told Crystal I'd kind of kick this off since I'm the one that started this. Back in 2017, council, we did a presentation as we updated our travel policy. And part of the discussion with the city council at that time was separating out policy and procedure. Back in 2002, when the city passed the current policies and procedure manual, the attorney that created that for the law firm that was under contract at the time felt it was best to combine policies and procedures in one form. What we found over the years is that procedures changed periodically based on changes in the marketplace, changes in forms, changes in process, and trying to marry up procedure and then constantly bring that back to the council was problematic. And so what happened is the procedures just changed as we did it. And if we had a reason to update the policy, then we brought the whole thing back. That seemed kind of unnecessary, and really the council's purview is policy. And so what we felt was we would bring policies, show you the procedures so you know what they're doing and what they are, and if there are any budgetary impacts, those are all addressed in the policy. But again, they're normally contemplated by the budget, so it's not something that's a surprise. But that way the policies would always be in front of the council for approval. The procedures could change internally based on, again, need, changes in market. The reason it came up in the travel policy context initially was between 2007, when the initial policy was crafted, and 2017, when the updated policy was crafted, the world of travel has changed tremendously. How hotels get paid for. Uber never existed in 2007. Baggage fees didn't exist in 2007. I mean, there's so many changes to procedure and reimbursements and such. So there was only a few of you that are still here that were there in 17, and the mayor felt as we're moving this project along to its conclusion this year, we wanted to make sure everybody else was in the loop on how did we get here? How did we begin this? Because since 17, when we've had a few policy changes, like the recent one, for example, on remote policy, we have split that into a policy and a procedure. And they're two separate pieces of the same policy, but one is for the policy handbook and one's for the procedural handbook. So that's kind of how we got here. And that's why we're here tonight, just to update you where we are. And then Crystal could talk about where the project is and what's the progress and the completion.
Great, thank you, Bill. Mr. Mayor, members of council, as Bill mentioned, HR and legal have been working on this effort to continue to move it forward. The director team will be reviewing these policies and procedures in June, July, and August. Once the director team has reviewed the documents and their feedback has been finalized, then we're going to be bringing forward for your review these policies and procedures, and that'll happen over the course of the fall and winter. Our goal will be to complete this initiative and adopt a new policy manual by January of 2021. And Bill and I stand for any questions that you may have.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Borton.
Crystal and Bill, I think I get the intent behind it from what you described, Bill, as where it started in trying to make it easier for us to keep focused on what is really within our purview and not maybe some of the day-to-day how those policies might be implemented specifically. But I think one of the questions which will be probably answered at a later date when we start seeing what it looks like are those details. It's a little, we just don't know yet the spectrum of minute procedure, which is clearly an internal operation issue that doesn't need us, versus procedure that really does get really close to the policy end, that, or even if we call it procedure, it's still something that the council would want to review and approve. You can think of something substantive like a particular benefit, maybe something that if a benefit changes for our employees one way or the other, if that falls on the procedure line, it's still something that the council would want to review and approve or not. And so as I understood where this was headed, I know at some later date when we see those specifics, we'll be able to articulate probably better direction from the council to say, ferreting off these as procedures make sense, but some of these procedures still might fall on the policy side, which is sort of a vague way of saying, I don't know yet if we can give any clear direction, kind of until we see those specifics and understand if, what Brad thinks is procedure and I think's procedure is the same as what Liz thinks, or right. And once we see those details, we probably can provide more productive direction. But I think the intent makes sense and is of good purpose.
So if it would be helpful, we can certainly send out to you tomorrow a sample, as Bill referenced in his introduction to this, Recently, the council approved the remote work policy number 210. That particular policy was all embedded in procedure into one document that we have split out into this new template. We can send that out to you tomorrow to give you more of a contextual and visual of what you will be receiving after the director team has reviewed the proposed changes. The changes that we're talking about are going to be more along the lines of formatting changes, some verbiage consistency, and then updating the information with current city practice. So that's, and then when we provide that information to you in the fall with the information to review, we're going to provide you a cover sheet or an overview of what the changes are that you're looking at. But we can certainly send out a sample tomorrow if that would be helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Crystal.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and speaking with Council President Burnt, totally understand, because it does provide you better context of what the policy is. So we can send that out to you. Again, many of the policies that you will see ultimately in the final product have no procedure to them because you just can't do it. You know, the policy prohibits certain behavior or certain actions. So there's no procedure in how to do it. So there are very limited ones. Travel was one that has a fairly lengthy procedure because there is reimbursements for travel, reimbursement for the transportation, reimbursement for hotel, how that all gets processed. So that's another example of why there's a lot of procedure. The policies are pretty clear on how we can travel and what we do. But yeah, we could send out a template to show you what it looks like. So that way you have a better idea, like you're saying, Councilman Morton.
And council, this is part of the reason why I want to have this conversation is, you know, I've got 9 directors who've been instructed to go through and review 70 some policies that have been worked on for 3 years. If council is not going to be comfortable with this direction, I want to stop legal and HR from working. And I don't want to ask my directors to go and, or your directors, our directors to go and do that work, because that will be significant investment of their time and resources as well to evaluate for HR and legal to take those comments and feedback and adjust them. So if whatever we need to do to either get council comfortable with what's being proposed or not, that's what I would like to do before we proceed too much further as a working body group to get that accomplished.
And Mr. Mayor, I was advised today there's 160 policies that we're reviewing. So.
Well, there's 78 policies.
Mm-hmm.
Break those down into a policy and procedure document, you're looking at, 160 plus documents.
Right.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hogan.
I think Councilman Borton summed up pretty well about definitely agree with the intent and the direction that you're trying to achieve. I would just suggest that maybe if there are some procedures that being separated from the policies that they just talk to their council liaison if there's any doubt or just an FYI type of thing and keep that moving forward. We definitely want to be involved with the policies, but yeah, the details and how it's implemented, it's kind of like the state of Idaho, legislature passes the law, the governor signs it, and the departments, administer, put in place rules. This is a little less at that level, but sometimes there are questions, where's the line? And I would just recommend they talk to their council liaison and kind of get some feedback. And I'd be comfortable if, Councilwoman Strader was asked about that and she said, no, this is fine. I trust her judgment on something like that. And it's been vetted that way.
Council, any further comments or questions at this time? If not, we can have Crystal provide and Bill a little bit of information to you all. And if necessary, we can bring this back for further conversation, or if council even would like to nominate one of your own or 2 of your own to work alongside to look at them in more greater detail. So at least 2 of you know what is being contemplated before we get the rest of the directors fully engaged. But we'll start with the email from Crystal and Bill with that information.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Perot.
One quick question for Crystal, and I apologize if I missed this. How frequently do the directors review the procedures? Is there a consistent calendar that they follow for that?
No, it's not on a consistent calendar. It's as a process comes up for discussion or for review. If a department or HR even has a recommendation, it is vetted out at the director level, ongoing throughout the year and as needed. It's not something that's calendared per se, that we would look at a certain procedure each year. Procedures can operationally change as the current needs change. As for example, we have a recruitment policy that talks about who does references and who does background checks, and those types of things can evolve and change, sometimes over time, sometimes more often than others. And so we want to make sure that we have a document that is available out to our employees to give guidance that has accurate and updated information for them as they're moving forward through their workday.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
I appreciated Councilman Borton's point. I think it's hard to know where exactly where that line is. And so agree, I don't think anybody here wants to get super bogged down in procedures that are like ministerial in nature at all. I just think, you know, are there ones that are kind of on the line where either Mr. Neri or someone says, yeah, this is kind of a gray area. This might be something that council would like more involvement in. It's sort of hard to know what might fit that category. But I guess, is there something we should watch out for, or maybe just some feedback on, you know, if you're running into things like that, we can talk about it.
Yeah, and I know this wasn't your intention, but I think the some of the issue right there is even in that comment where council would like more feedback on, you know, that is the gray area between policy and procedure. You know, whether or not these are changed or not from policies to procedures, you know, that line between council authority versus implementation versus where you want to weigh in, that's not always clear, and sometimes it should be best defined however we can to avoid where council just wants to weigh in. Should versus wants.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Borton.
Mr. Mayor, a couple of points on that. The process will go through this. We'll be doing so with the mindset not.
Would someone take a screenshot?
I think we lost him.
We lost you, Joe.
You're back.
So that was brilliant, but we didn't hear any of it.
Oh,
That's so good.
That's funny.
Mr. Mayor.
Never mind.
Chris can screenshot these.
Perhaps if Mr. Borton wants to maybe turn off his camera, I have found in some other Zoom meetings that when you turn off your camera, it allows your audio to at least come through and stop some of the buffering that he's experiencing. Just a thought. And he may have already left, so.
I'm just kidding, Joe. Don't get mad.
But Councilman Borton left us hanging at the mindset, and you know, I was into it. I wanted to find out what's the mindset.
Councilman Borton is the liaison to human resources, so I think that if having him have that conversation and continue to work with legal and HR and being the attorney on the group and having his very own opinion about where that line exists is a great conversation to have.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
And he's not here right now to oppose, so I don't know if we need to make formal action of volunteering him, but I'm definitely supportive.
I think that if we can just encourage him to work with legal and HR, and he can update the council president as needed from his viewpoint about how we move forward. If council could be agreeable to that, of course you'll have your own ideas, time to look at it, but perfect. All right, we'll make it so. Thank you, Mr. Borton. Mr. Burnt, should I turn over 5D over to you, or is this Mr. Neri?
Mr. Mayor, I can handle it with the help of Mr. Neri as well. So we're sort of reaching the end of, Zoom meetings. We're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel and wanting to get feedback from council in regard to how much longer we have these Zoom meetings and what this looks like, after we're back in council chambers. And so I know that there's some restrictions on how many people can be in a room at the same time. I don't know the details of what that looks like, but just wanted to kick off a quick discussion. We're a little bit past 5:30, but just get what your thoughts are as a council.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I'm happy to chime in. I've been putting quite a bit of thought around this, and I think it's important that whatever path that we go down, that includes an option or an opportunity for any council member or staff to be able to continue to participate virtually in some form or another. I don't want any staff member or council member to feel like that they've got to potentially put their family's health in jeopardy. We all have different timetables that we're comfortable in kind of matriculating back into whatever the new world is. But I think that we should move in terms of, if we're going to do away with Zoom, at the speed of whatever council member is comfortable with that last. I think that we have learned quite a great deal during this time, and I've really appreciated the lengths that staff has went to allow the public to testify remotely. And I would hope that we continue to utilize this as a solution to allow the public to be able to testify from home, whether they have concerns about COVID or they have concerns about putting their kid to bed. Should be able to have a way to be able to participate remotely. Those are kind of my thoughts. I feel comfortable coming back into City Hall for these meetings. So if we want some folks to stay home and some folks to come in, I'm happy to volunteer for that. I also have enjoyed holding these meetings from my office. And so if we want to continue this longer, I'm also not opposed to that either.
Councilman Burnt, did you want to touch on the item that Councilman Cavanagh mentioned about the ability to continue to do these meetings?
Right. Yeah, we spoke about this as well. That was my concern as well, Councilman Cavanagh. We're on the same page. And so I don't know if I'm going to go as far as say I've really enjoyed these meetings on Zoom. I mean, I certainly, it's just sort of reality, but the reality is, we all go on vacations and we all want to be involved, and we don't want to watch YouTube videos or get up to breast, the next day, calling each other on cell phones, getting up to speed. And so I spoke with Mr. Clerk, and there is absolutely 100% a way to do this going forward, not only for us as staff members, or excuse me, us as council members, but as elected officials, but also staff and the public who would like to chime in virtually as well. So I think that it's very, very doable. We just need to make sure that it works well with the inner workings of council chambers. But Mr. Clerk is he's a pro. I mean, there's no one that's done a better job than he has, and Adrian, with this virtual meeting system. And so they seem to be fairly confident that we can do this going forward on all levels.
If I could just temper Council President's unbridled passion into 100%, it's been conveyed that we believe we can hold meetings in the room and also simultaneously hold the mobile testimony through a Zoom platform, and that we can, through a few items, we can solve the issues that have plagued us by trying to do this previously. Where we believe we can now take remote testimony and could have a combined meeting situation. And so I guess that's really where we are, is we can go fully back into the room. We can try to do a split between the two. Or we could follow under the governor's order as long as we can and just continue to meet in this version. Just looking, if council would like to try the middle road, we can move towards that direction. Then the only question becomes when. To make
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Pro.
Like Councilman Kavner, I don't have any concerns about personally attending the meetings at City Hall. I think the city's done a phenomenal job of taking great care about social distancing and making sure that people are interacting appropriately. But I am wondering about the public, and when the few meetings that we had in person where we had all of the chairs at 6 feet apart, they were not meetings where we had a lot of the public that attended. But I'm curious what will happen if we do have one of those meetings, and if we're still under the governor's orders to stay 6 feet apart, how do we accommodate those members of the public?
My belief is that we would have the chair set up and only allow people in, no different than if we had a meeting where we had 250 people show up. We have occupancy levels, we've got police and fire present, that we will use that to help enforce that. I mean, that's whatever we set, we need to abide by it, whatever that turns out to be. And that's why we have overflow that people could go into to watch. You can rotate people in and out of the room as testimony requires. I think that there's ways to accommodate it, but yeah, there will be times where not everyone can be in the room or should be in the room.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, and that might work, because I know early on we were talking about the option of having people out in their car and then they're retrieved to be brought in. The stage 4, if we go to the next stage, doesn't begin until June 13th. So that our next meeting would be 14, 15, 16, the 17th. But we may have to have, if we still, even under stage 4, there is appropriate physical distancing requirement. So, we've got to make sure we have that in place. You can't put everybody in overflow. It's going to take up a lot of room to have social distancing. So I'm fine with doing this for a few more meetings to just make sure we're through this and we keep people safe, and hopefully we're into stage 4, or if we have to go beyond, whatever, and we can resume almost normal function. I think it's a great idea to have this as an option for folks to be able to come and testify in a meeting. But I do look forward to the day where we can be in person and have these discussions face to face, and as well as allowing people to come into through Zoom or whatever platform we use. But I think we're still a couple weeks away from that, unless staff can come up with a way to have people put around and outside of City Hall if it's a big hearing, and be able to do that adequately. So we can discuss further.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Perone.
Would there be a way to communicate with the members of the public who'd like to attend that the priority will be given to individuals who are planning on testifying to be in the room with us, and anyone who is there to watch, to just observe, perhaps that we can encourage them to do it via video or on Zoom? Is there a way for us to do that?
I think we could try, but we have no way to enforce that.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Neri.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So what we're operating under right now is a governor's directive that has suspended the open meeting law requirements that require that we have open access into the room. That order is actually going to expire on June 11th. I anticipate the governor extending it because it's related to his emergency order from back in March that is tied up in funding and other issues of the state. So I anticipate that being continued. Again, it only allows us to do it, doesn't require us to do it. But you hit on the right note there, Councilmember Perot, is I don't know how to, if without that order in place, I'm not sure how I can limit people coming in the room other than by size. And so can we limit people in the building? If the social distancing has always been a recommendation, not a mandatory requirement. So I'm not sure yet how we limit access. Again, we're providing a lot of other access, but I'm not sure how we limit access with that. If that provision of the law is reinstated by the governor, we'll have to work through that to figure out how to create a safe environment, but also allow people to participate.
Mr. Mayor.
Um,
This is Chris.
Chris.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Perot, one thing we attempted to do before we moved to Zoom was put start times for agenda topics on the agenda. A will not start before time so that we could limit people in the room. So if that was the direction of council and the mayor, we could do that as we transition back in. Just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Yeah, I think the format has been great, and I love that we're giving the public an additional way to access their local government. I think that's great. I'm kind of following where I think Councilman Hoagland is going, which is it doesn't feel like we're quite ready. I'd love to have a solid plan for how people could attend in person and get the word out and how that's going to be implemented, and then make sure we're really moving into stage 4 and that this kind of fits with what the governor's doing. And I'm a little hesitant to go totally back in person if we may be changing directions in a couple weeks anyway. We've opened up a lot, and I think we'll want to see what happens to the numbers. So I rather than have everyone change how they're attending now, I'd rather wait a little bit, maybe a few weeks, and then evaluate again. But meanwhile, prepare a plan for how we would do it in person.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
And Mr. Mayor, council, you may forgive me. I thought that maybe at a council meeting we had talked about doing this virtual meeting through June. Did I mishear? Am I misunderstanding? Because I guess to me, I've been looking at this as July moving forward, not necessarily next week.
All I know is that we've been operating as long as the governor's order is ineffective. That's as far as we could go. So we can do next week if we choose in this way. But after that, unless they change it, then we don't have an option under state code to not hold it in person.
Mr. Mayor.
Have someone in the room.
Yeah.
Mary or Mr. Cavanagh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, then, I think this is good that we've got the conversation going, but it doesn't sound like we need to make a decision necessarily tonight. We know that we eventually will move back to being in the building in some form or another. But in terms of setting a date specific, is that something that we can wait to determine after we hear whatever future action is going to be taken by the governor? Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, I think that's a good course of action. We need to know what the next step is and see what happens and see what the level of comfort is with among the community members. I know for our house of worship that they're talking about going back in a couple of weeks, and there's still a lot of hesitancy. So I think we'll know it when the time is right. I'm afraid it's not something we can set arbitrarily, but there's got to be a confidence level in the public that will work. And I think we can just do this. Maybe Councilman Burnt, it should be a topic every week. Or, what does it look like for next week? When are we ready? What's the feeling? And just check the temperature each week, and we'll probably finally find a time when we go, yep, it's time next week. So, but it wouldn't hurt for council or our city clerk and others to kind of be prepared and have contingencies, and like you mentioned, having these won't start before timeframes, because if this is still going to be an option, then let's continue giving some certainty that way as well.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Martin.
One of those side benefits, if we've got members of the public who are, there's long-term greater accessibility for our public to participate. We've always been focused on trying to capture that. If that's part of it, we drink the Kool-Aid.
No.
First, proceed accordingly to try and ensure we. That's important.
Again, I think we just heard some brilliant remarks by Councilman Borton, but he may be the only one that heard them.
Radio's gonna go. Did you hear that?
No.
Nothing works over here.
That's better.
Right. We can hear you now.
I heard that.
I apologize.
Okay, well, we will leave this in the hands of your council president to help determine how and when we move forward, assuming we have that flexibility from the governor, at least to re-engage in the conversation with you all, whether it's in this format or another format per se. Okay. With that, we are at the nearing end of our agenda. Do I have any motions?
Hey, Mr. Mayor, do we want to maybe close or adjourn the meeting and maybe move the executive session after the 6 o'clock meeting? So we have more time.
I don't know if I know our person is waiting for us. We could go in and see, and if we need to come back afterwards, if they're available, we can do that.
Okay.
Our 6 o'clock meeting is very quick, to my knowledge, but I can't speak for how much you all want to talk on those items. So I don't know, but.
So I guess we can go into executive session and see how it goes. And if we have to, have another one after 6 o'clock meeting, we can do that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Burnt.
I move that we move to executive session, Parida Code 74-206D.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hogan.
second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to go into executive session. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Borton,
Aye.
Cavanagh,
Aye.
Perot,
Aye.
Strader,
Aye.
Hoagland,
Aye.
Burnt,
Aye.
All ayes. Thank you.
Hello, Pastor. Thanks for joining us. Hoping the
Hi.
meeting will start close to 6. They're in executive session, and hopefully they'll come back out relatively soon and get us started.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Council, do I have a motion? Mr. Burton, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I move that we come out of executive session.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to come out of executive session. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I have
Second.
a motion and a second. I have a motion and a second to adjourn our first meeting. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. I will call this meeting to order. For the record, it is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020 at 6:03 p.m. We will begin this meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Borton. Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Perot.
Here.
Councilwoman Strader.
Here.
Councilman Hoagland.
Here.
Councilman Burnt.
Here.
Absent is Councilman Borton.
Item number 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll all please rise and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3 is our community invocation, which will be led by Vin. Vin Hickey of Valley Life Christian Church. If you will all take this as a moment of reflection or join us in the community invocation. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, City Council members, thanks for the opportunity to pray for you. And I'll be doing it right now and throughout the month. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for the opportunity to be gathered. We thank you for the gift of technology that allows the business of the city to continue even in the midst of a global pandemic. God, we pray for the health and welfare of the city of Meridian. God, we know that a city is only as strong as the quality of its citizens. And so, God, we pray for a sense of peace and hope among the people of the city. And that, God, that would be representative among the city council members. I thank you for their willingness to serve and answer the call to lead, and pray, God, that you would provide them wisdom, prudence, hope, that, God, you would continue to protect the peace and tranquility of this city. And God, we even ask that you might instill a sense of peace across our nation, God, as we just watch civil unrest take hold, and pray that you might protect us from that here. We might seek a sense of unity and justice together for the good of all citizens in Meridian. We ask these things, Father, for your glory and our good through your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Item number 4, adoption.
Mayor, we good? I didn't hear what you said.
Item number 4, adoption of the agenda.
Okay, that's what I was waiting for. We're going to change up the agenda a little bit. We had an executive session that we weren't able to finish, and so we're going to add item 8, executive session per Idaho Code 74-206D as item number 8. Other than that, I move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
Second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as amended. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Madam or Mr. Clerk, did we have anyone sign up under item 5?
Mr. Mayor, we did not.
Okay. So with that, we will move into item 6A, resolution number 2213, appointing Walter Steed to seat 2 of the Meridian Transportation Commission. So council, I had the opportunity to sit down with Mr. Steed, along with our chair of the Transportation Commission. We had extremely qualified candidates once again for this commission. And much like the last one though, when we've lost a citizen, a more general citizen, that's what the role that Mr. Steed really kind of comes in, but he comes in with a wealth of knowledge and experience as a former city council member up north, where he has spent time on transportation commission related issues up there. So he is very familiar with the role of the Transportation Commission, as well as being an advisory or recommending group to city council. I think the one thing that really was a great addition to his consideration, our Transportation Commission has been looking to get more involved in issues. One of the things they've even talked about doing is should they comment on land use applications. That is something that the Transportation Commission that Mr. Steed worked on up north did. So he has at least has some experience that he could bring to that conversation if that's a direction the Transportation Commission would like to go in the future. So with that, I hardly recommend him to the seat on the Transportation Commission. With Sam for any questions.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
No question, just a comment. I think we all received a copy of a letter from Mr. Steed. Appreciate him sending that along to us. And true to his character, he actually attended yesterday's Transportation Commission and is quickly getting up to speed and getting quickly right to work. At least yesterday in a voluntary capacity, pending tonight's decision. But with that, I would move that we would approve resolution number 20-2213, resolution appointing Walter Steed, to seat 2 of the Meridian Transportation Commission.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
I have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 22-2213. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Item 6B is the second reading of ordinance number 20-1881. And I will turn this over to, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask for your help and how this is supposed to proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I told, excuse me, Mr. Ariel from Community Development, I'd at least start off where we are. And then there are people that are present to talk about the Urban Renewal District. So before you, council, is the second reading of the ordinance, both to remove a section from the existing Urban Renewal District and then to create a new Urban Renewal District. It has been through the legal process through the Planning and Zoning Commission for comment. There is a report that's been prepared as required by statute on the viability of the district and the necessity and the need for it. We have Mr. Cushlan has been working on this with the property owners as well as the city, as well as MDC on this. So we have followed all the legal steps necessary to do this separation and creation of a new district. And again, tonight is second reading. If there are changes to be made to the ordinance after tonight's discussion, we can make those changes prior to third reading scheduled for next week. So that's kind of where we are. I think Mr. Ariel wants to kick off the presentation part of the district.
So, Mr. Nair, do we need to have the clerk? Is there any reading that needs to occur for items B and C, or do we go directly into item D?
We do not need to read them unless, again, we can read them by title, and then we can go to item D.
Okay. Well, with that, I would ask the clerk to please read item 6B and 6C by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 6B is the second reading of Ordinance 20-1881, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Meridian approving the First Amendment to the Meridian Revitalization Urban Renewal Project Plan, which First Amendment seeks to de-annex certain parcels from the existing Meridian Revitalization Project area, which First Amendment amends a plan that includes a revenue allocation financing provision, authorizing the city clerk to transmit a copy of this ordinance and other required information to the county, affected taxing entities, and state officials, approving the summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date. Item 6C is a second reading of Ordinance 20-1882, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Meridian approving the Urban Renewal Plan for the Union District Urban Renewal Project, which plan includes revenue allocation financing provisions, authorizing the city clerk to transmit a copy of this ordinance and other required information to the county, affected taxing entities, and state officials, approving the summary of the ordinance, and providing an effective date.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will move into item 6D. I'll turn this over to Mr. Ariel.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, really good to be with you this evening. And to taking this next step in the redevelopment of our downtown. As many of you know, and I'm sure if you've read from the memo and documentation, this is a significant step in that direction. There's been a lot of work stemming back, years, but, even in current history with the RFP process that was approved by the past council and the MDC board to move forward with an RFP for, a downtown revitalization project. That response to that RFP stipulated the need for basically the creation of this new district, and also therefore the de-annexation from the old district. So that's kind of the reason you have two resolutions before you. And we're really looking forward to the discussion from you all, any comment, and then also, hearing from the public as well. That then, if there, any changes to the plan or any modifications, we can turn that around prior to the third reading next week. So just really looking forward to the discussion. I think hopefully everyone has received the information and answered any questions that you may have, but open to any of that dialogue now. Just one point of clarification. The reason for the de-annexation, of course, is that this is in the existing downtown urban renewal area. And because there's limited time left on that, in order for the tax increment financing mechanism to be most effective, we need to de-annex these properties and create the new district, so we have a new time horizon. Again, the sole purpose will then be to channel this the potential revenues into needed infrastructure and public improvements that the city is looking to accomplish. We do have Mr. Kuchlan available if you have technical questions towards the plan. I think it is important to note as well, previously presented to you guys the eligibility report from Mr. Kuchlan, and these properties that are included here certainly meet the criteria for blight and qualification for the creation of an urban renewal district. And I think it is important to note the fiscal aspect. That's kind of the tail end of my memo there. Really, the properties as they exist have a de minimis value, and therefore, if they were to be removed and sit vacant, it would have very little, if any, impact to the existing district and the revenue collection. But if they do redevelop and the values go up, there's significant opportunity for revenue capture, and therefore the opportunity to do these projects. With that, I'll conclude and look forward to the discussion.
Right. Thank you, Cameron. Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Ariel at this time, or Mr. Kuchlan?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
I was wondering if there is any relevant update on capital markets conditions for the bond issuance, and confirmation that the city of Meridian at this point doesn't need to guarantee the issuance, or if there's any additional information we should know in light of, I work in the capital markets and I know many of the markets are disrupted. So I thought we would ask for an update.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman Schrader, a great question. Fortunately for these projects, at least as we envision them, there's no financing, at least capital markets financing associated with them. So it is kind of in keeping with our finance department and past council's, policy or unwritten policy that the city doesn't borrow. That being said, this is a partnership with MDC, and that's the way we would partner with them and envision that moving forward. but directly to your question, there is quite a bit of upheaval in the markets. It's hard to, get a stable investor base to actually go to issuance. And so, fortunately, again, we don't need to go to that extent, and we look to capture the revenue over time and do our projects via the public-private partnerships with the winners of the RFP. So, fortunately for us, we're don't need to get into those muddy waters at this time.
Mr. Mayor, follow up.
Administrator.
So just to put a finer point on it, and that was my impression too, but just to make sure I fully understand, it's my first go around. I asked a lot of questions, but I might have more. So this will be a pay-as-you-go type entity, in other words. So as the receipts come in of the taxes that normally would go to the city, in other words, those funds can be used and directed toward the urban renewal. But at no point would MDC or another entity either incur a legal obligation that the city might have to fulfill, or perhaps take on a public-private partnership where we have liability to complete a project.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Strader, so the way that this is proposed to roll forward is the public-private partnership. The developer is essentially going to front any of the improvements via their own financing and their own development. Then the generated tax increment as it flows in would be a reimbursal to them, basically on a pay for performance basis. So let's say there's road improvements or utility improvements that would need to be done. Those would be fronted by the developer, and then as that increment is generated, MDC, in this case, the revenue is actually floated to MDC. MDC would be obligated to reimburse. But again, that's all based on agreements that would be in place. And again, they would be performance based.
Mr. Mayor, follow up.
Yeah, let me try to get the answer to your question a little bit further. Mr. Neri, if you can confirm, can the MDC obligate the city in the future by their actions to a financial payment of some sort?
So, Mr. Mayor, my camera's not working, but no. So the city would not ever be under the obligation to pay off any of the bonds or debts of the urban renewal district.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's in the code.
Any further questions at this time on this item? Okay. So Adrian, I understand we had some people who've signed up to testify.
Mr. Mayor, we have one person signed up, and that is Bill Truax, joining us on the line today.
Okay. I was not prepared with my clock, but I'm getting there. So Mr. Truax, you will have 3 minutes to provide comments on this item. If you can state your name and address for the record, and I will hit start when you're done. I see you've unmuted yourself, so you're good to go at any point in time, Mr. Truax. Bill, are you there? So, council, as we wait for Mr. Truax to hopefully get his audio working. I don't see that we have anyone on the call from MDC at this point in time, at least in the room. We do have Ms. Squires there.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. For some reason, I'm having problems on the audio and visual side, but sounds like we're good. Bill Truax, address 999 West Main, Suite 1400, Boise, Idaho 83702. Thank you all for entertaining the discussion tonight. I didn't really have a whole lot to enter here. Did want to reiterate what has been discussed already, and that's that that the financing is intended to be carried on the development end, and that so far the capital markets issues that have been raised are not going to affect this development. And I think a lot of that has to do just with the general timing of the execution, as opposed to if we were already underway on trying to raise any financing currently. By the time it comes to market, hopefully we've got a little bit more clarity and direction.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Council, any questions for Mr. Truax at this time? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, sorry.
Councilman Schrader.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Truax. I was wondering if you could give us a feel for your end of things. I mean, certainty is important to us. I know you did the whole RFP process and went before the previous council, but just would be great to hear you're not relying on a piece of financing that's not in place to move forward on the project.
No, I mean, the general basis of the TIF itself in the new district is going to rely on the eventual development of the property across the street. That is going well. Our timeline is a little bit shorter than we were expecting on the assumption or the purchase of that property. So the timeline seems to be working out in our favor. We are currently working on design development documents to bring to the city. So we would have the taxable use on the other side of the street to generate the increment. So those things appear to be going well. It is still frothy out there, but again, the multifamily space is a good space to be in, and you're talking about a development deal, so you're presumably beyond the implications of COVID, at least in the near term.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any further questions, Mr. Truax, at this time? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing. If there's anybody else who is on the line who would like to testify on this item, if you're in the waiting room, you can raise your hand and the city clerk can move you in for the conversation. Or if you're listening through YouTube and you want to come in, you can come on over and activate into the meeting through your phone. I don't see anybody raising their hand at this time. So council, any additional questions or comments that you'd like to make, or do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burr.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to close the combined public hearing on ordinance 20-1881. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Cavanagh.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just from a process standpoint, would this then close the door for any additional public testimony to be received on these items?
I believe it would. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, a follow-up?
Councilman Cavanagh.
And maybe Bill can chime in and refresh my memory. We're gonna, a decision will likely be rendered on this next week. And I guess I'm just curious if we lose the opportunity to take any additional testimony, written or verbal, over the course of the next 7 days. And if so, I would maybe be more supportive of continuing the public hearing for one additional week, should anybody else from the public would testify. clearly we're not being overwhelmed with testimony tonight. I don't anticipate it, but I just, with something like this, if there's an opportunity to keep the public testimony open and available, I would think that's something we may want to at least discuss.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr.
Mayor, members of council, Councilman Cavanagh, that's perfectly fine. I think we have enough space to have it, again, even if it were to get delayed an additional week, I think we'd be fine. If there are no comments and there are no requested changes tonight from the council that you want us to incorporate into the ordinance, if there were to be something to come in between now and next Wednesday or Tuesday, we could certainly address that. I think we would be fine.
Okay. And Mr. Mayor, for the benefit of the public, I'm supportive of what we have had before us. I appreciate the work that staff and Mr. Cushion, the consultant, and Ms. Squires with MDC, the work they've put in to this, and it has addressed many of the concerns that I've had. So my desire to continue the public testimony is not a nefarious one in nature, but just more of a process standpoint to allow any opportunity to allow the public to chime in support of this great project, this great idea, I think is well worth it.
Okay, so with that, does the motion maker and the second would like to revise their motion, or they'd like to proceed, or is there further discussion on the request from Mr. Cavanagh?
Mr. Mayor, I'm fine with waiting a week. I don't think it changes anything. It's a great project and certainly meets the intent of urban renewal redevelopment. We saw the eligibility report, checks all the boxes, and it's going to be a great thing. But to leave it open for a week to allow people just an opportunity to comment, I'm fine with that. But I'll let the maker of the motion determine that.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Burr.
I don't mind either. My only concern would be there's a time frame involved in this process, and I wouldn't want to delay this time frame based upon this, keeping the public hearing open for another week. So if we can confirm that this timeline would be in place with us keeping this public hearing open for another week, then I would be more than happy to change my motion. But I'd like to confirm that before I do.
Mr. Neri.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Conrad, Megan on the call has also been working with the property owners as well, and is working with them on the urban renewal. We could certainly ask her. I'm asking Mr. Baird right now. I do recall that we had put this some wiggle room in there in case there were any issues or concerns that were raised. So I don't think a week is a problem, but if Megan has a different opinion of that, certainly she could tell us.
Megan, I see you're unmuting yourself. If you wouldn't mind answering that question, so I guess the public hearing is technically still open, even though we're in a motion, but we can take additional information. Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Can you hear me?
We can barely. If you can speak up.
Okay, I will yell. We are on a fairly tight turnaround. There are a number of post-ordinance adoption actions that need to occur. And we need to publish the ordinance, record, and there's another set of transmittal letters that need to go out. And the goal is to really have this wrapped up by July 1. So with that in mind, well, I suppose it could be pushed for a week. Is it my understanding that the public hearing open, perhaps the ordinances would still be considered at the time of the public meeting next week?
I believe that is the case, yes.
thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. That should work to pushing the timeline. That would be, of course, best in terms of trying to meet these other deadlines we have, but certainly defer to city attorney and mayor and council for that decision. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure what she just said.
What I heard is there's a lot of stuff that they got to do, but so long as it does not interfere with next week's third reading ordinance, that she would defer to the city attorney on this issue.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I just conferred with Ted, and again, we built this 1 week cushion in there because of what Megan just stated on the other. We still have to publish. Remember, our publishing is a week and a half out because it's published on a weekly, and so that's what the concern is. But if we don't change the ordinance next week, we don't have a problem. That was the rationale of why we wanted the hearing tonight, is that there were changes, we'd make the changes tonight for next week and then have that for approval. Again, if your preference is to leave it open for a week on the off chance someone does want to weigh in, and then we can at least accept it, that's fine. Like I said, I think we'll be okay. Ted thinks we'll be okay. We've done this before. We try to build that extra weekend for that reason. So I think we can do that if that's your desire.
Okay, let's do it. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to rescind my motion and make a new one, please.
Councilman Burnt.
Second consents with the withdrawal.
I would like to make a motion to continue the public hearing until next week.
Second the motion.
I have a motion second to continue the public hearing for ordinance 20-1881 and 1882 to June 9th. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. All right, we are item 7, future meeting topics. Any items for future meeting topics?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
again, I don't know if a future meeting topic or perhaps maybe just a suggestion for as we continue to improve our process. With the packets that we receive on Friday, I've been noticing oftentimes some topics don't have really any explanation as to what council is going to be hearing. And I guess maybe just a request that even if there's just a brief paragraph or a couple of sentences so that we have a good understanding as to what those topics are. It helps me to prepare over the weekend as I'm going through things to have a good understanding about what particular around the topics that we're going to be discussing. On the land use side, we've got that dialed down. It's some of the stuff that we're seeing more and more on our workshops that don't have a lot of explanation. So perhaps a conversation between you and the council president about ways that we may be able to improve that so that both the council and the public have an understanding as to what's going to be discussed.
Okay. With that, item 8.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
I move that we go into an executive session prior to code 74-206D.
Second the motion.
I have a motion second to go into executive session. The clerk will call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cavanagh,
Aye.
Barrow,
Aye.
Strader,
Aye.
Hoagland,
Aye.
Burnt,
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries. Just a reminder to the clerks that we will be back to close out this hearing once we finish with that executive session.
Dean, this is Chris. If you can hear me, I can send you the after meeting audio.
That's fine, Chris. That'll
Nice.
work.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dean.
Bet.
Council, do I have a motion?
Mayor, move that we come out of executive session.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, come out of executive session. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Do I have another motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn this meeting this evening.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. We are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good
all.
night.
Good night.
Aye.